A few years back, there was this trend within the vegan community to consume a very high carb, low fat, and consequently low protein diet. And this minimized the importance of protein, and it made it seem as though as long as you're consuming enough calories, protein isn't really a nutrient that most vegans need to worry about. And although this might be true in certain cases, unfortunately, simply making sure that you eat enough calories won't automatically result in you also eating enough protein. And protein is a nutrient that's important in so many functions in the body, so it's definitely worth making sure that you get enough of it on a regular basis. Yet when I look at vegan what I eat in a day, protein isn't always the nutrient that comes forward as one that people really prioritize. That's why I thought that in this video, I'd share some of the tips that I currently rely on to make sure that I include enough protein to my meals and my snacks on a plant-based vegan diet. Vegans often get asked about protein. What foods do we get it from? How do we make sure that we get enough? And while it's absolutely possible to get enough protein on a well-balanced vegan diet, the key word here is well-balanced. And that actually requires actively making sure that you add a protein-rich plant food to most of your meals and your snacks. While low-protein diets, such as the 80-10-10 diet that was so popular a little while back, may theoretically be sufficient to meet our basic biological protein needs, there are several advantages to eating more than the minimum daily amount of protein our bodies require. For instance, protein can help reduce cravings, it can help keep hunger at bay, make you feel fuller for longer after your meals, and can even promote bone health. And a little extra protein is especially useful when you're trying to build muscle or when you're, for example, trying to maintain your muscle mass while you're losing body fat. And additional protein can go a long way during periods such as pregnancy, when your body uses all that extra protein to support all of the changes that it needs to undergo to grow a child, and also uses it to help your baby grow and develop to the best of their ability. And since I'm currently expecting baby number 2, it's especially important for me to get enough protein at this time in my life, which is just another reason why I thought it might be a great moment for me to share the foods that I currently rely on to add some extra protein to my meals and snacks. All plant foods contain some protein, that's a fact. However, not all of them can be considered good sources of protein. For example, some like spinach and mushrooms may contain a large amount of protein per calorie, but because these foods are naturally very low in calories, you need to eat a ridiculously large portion of them to truly get a significant amount of protein. And others, like nuts and seeds, may contain a significant amount of protein per portion, but they also contain large amounts of fat. So you'd be hard-pressed to get enough protein per day from consuming only these type of foods without also consuming excessively high amounts of fat. With that in mind, here are the plant foods that I consider the best sources of protein. They're all moderately energy dense and contain between 10 and 20 grams of protein per portion. First, you've got seitan, then you've got tofu, tempeh, and edamame beans, lentils, chickpeas, all the other beans you can think of, and nutritional yeast. Other foods are slightly lower in protein, but they can still be helpful when you're trying to just add a touch of extra protein to your meals and snacks. They contain between 3 and 8 grams of protein per portion. You've got yeast spread like Marmite, which I've heard is very popular in Australia and New Zealand, not so popular here in the Netherlands, although I've tried it. I can't say that it was my favorite, but I gave it a try. We've got hemp seeds, flax, and chia seeds. Hemp seeds are the highest in protein of the 3. Then you've got pumpkin seeds, soy milk, and soy yogurt, other nuts, seeds, or their butters, peas, and then in terms of grains, teff, spelt, and quinoa are the ones that are the richest in protein. Here are a few ways in which I use these foods to add extra protein to my plant-based meals and snacks. First, you've got seitan, tofu, and tempeh, and I'll add these to meals that would typically require a meat or meat substitute. For instance, I may add marinated tempeh on top of my pizzas, or crumble some tofu into a pasta sauce, add seitan to a dish like ratatouille, or sauteed tofu to an Asian-style soup or noodle dish. And I'll also use these foods when making sandwiches and wraps, for example, scrambled tofu into a wrap, or smoked tofu slices on top of a tomato and lettuce sandwich. When it comes to lentils and beans, I like eating them as part of Mexican, Indian, or Asian dishes. For instance, lentils in a tasty dal, or edamame beans as the main protein source in spring rolls, or beans for quesadillas or chili. And in the fall, I particularly like to add beans and lentils into soups. For instance, I'll make a pumpkin soup and then blend some white beans into it. Now for chickpeas, I love roasting them and using them as a replacement for croutons on soups or salads. And I'll also eat roasted chickpeas as a snack or add them either roasted or unroasted to a hummus sandwich or wrap to boost its protein content. I also got into the habit of sprinkling a little hemp, flax, or chia seeds onto most of my meals and snacks. Like I said before, hemp seeds are the richest in protein of the bunch, but I like to rotate between the three for variety. As for nutritional yeast, I like sprinkling it onto foods from time to time as well. My little one has actually taken a liking to nutritional yeast and would eat it by the spoonful if she could, but I tend to just sprinkle a little bit on top of pasta dishes mainly. Now when it comes to soy milks and yogurts, I often rely on them to boost the protein content of my breakfasts or my snacks, and I'll often add nuts, seeds, or nut butters or seed butters into them because although they offer quite a low amount of protein in comparison with the amount of fat that they contain, I see them as a protein-rich source of fat. So I typically use them to just add a little extra touch of protein to my breakfasts and snacks. I'm currently working on an article that will share some of my favorite protein-rich vegan meal and snack ideas, so stay tuned for that. I'll put a link in the description box below for it whenever it's ready so you can check it out. Some of you may be wondering, well, what about mock meats and protein powders? Those are really high in protein, right? Why haven't you mentioned them yet? And that's simply because I prefer to rely on whole foods or minimally processed foods as my sources of protein rather than more highly processed ones. And while mock meats and protein powders are great sources of protein when it comes to the amount of protein that they offer, they're typically made from an isolated protein source, for instance, soy protein isolate. And the problem with that is that isolated sources of protein tend to contain much lower amounts of vitamins, minerals, and other beneficial nutrients compared to sourcing the protein from the whole food source instead, in this case soybeans, for example. So although mock meats and protein powders can be helpful to boost the protein content of your meals, relying on these protein sources too heavily can cause you to fail meeting your daily requirements for other important nutrients. And that's without mentioning that some mock meats tend to contain large amounts of added fat, salt, or sugar, which shouldn't make up a large part of a well-balanced plant-based diet. An additional minus point for protein powders is that a proportion of them can become contaminated with unwanted compounds, such as lead, for example, and you wouldn't be able to tell this by simply looking at the label. You can minimize this risk by opting for brands that get third parties to test their products to ensure that they truly contain what's listed on the label. So if you find protein powders handy, I'd certainly recommend that you look into certifications such as Certified for Sport, which you can read more about on informedchoice.org. Of course, having mock meats and protein powder supplements from time to time isn't a terrible thing. It's not gonna do terrible things for your health. And these food products can be certainly helpful for people that have a hard time meeting their protein requirements from whole or minimally processed foods alone. But I'd just be mindful to keep the proportion that these food products take into your diet smaller than the proportion of protein that comes from whole or minimally processed plant foods. If you'd like more information on protein requirements on a vegan diet or the main differences between getting your protein from plants versus animal foods, make sure to check out the accompanying article to this video, which I'm currently in the midst of finalizing and which will be posted on the Veggies and More website as soon as it's done. I'll put a link in the description box down below so you can check it out whenever it's ready. Now, if you wouldn't mind, I would strongly encourage you to share some of your favorite high protein meal and snack ideas in the comment section down below so we can all benefit from them. I'm particularly on the lookout for high protein breakfast ideas, so I'd love it if you also include some of these down below. And with that said, that's it for today. Until next time, ciao ciao!